Welcome to Unit 3. All right, way to go. You've completed the first 2 units, the first 11 chapters, right? We're on chapter 12 now, and that's just tremendous. You've made great strides. We're in the home stretch. Don't let up now. You're almost seeing the end of the big, long race we've been at. So let's get it done and have a great Christmas after it's all done, right? We talked about our good times together. Okay, so chapter 12 is the nervous system. Obviously, my favorite, and it begins by we'll talk about the two basic cell types found in the nervous system. The first one you've heard thrown around already many times when we talked about the skeletal muscles, and that one is the neuron. And the neuron is made up of a basic cell body. It has several short extensions out of it called dendrites, and one major long cellular extension called an axon that is going to be used to communicate information between the neuron's cell body and another cell. Perhaps a cell found in the heart, a cell found in skeletal muscle, or even another neuron. So neurons are responsible for this generation of action potentials and communication among cells. They could not do this job without the supporting cells called neuroglia. I wish we had more time to talk a lot more about them, but we don't, sadly. So just for now, we'll have one whole video devoted to them, but for now, neuroglia are the support cells that are going to maintain the environment of the neurons, keep toxic waste away from them, and keep the area vacuumed up and cleaned, and also protect them. What are the roles of the nervous system? Well, the nervous system's job is to accumulate sensory data. Is it hot? Is it cold? Does that taste good? Does it smell bad? Is it visually pleasing? So does the sound just horrible? All of these various sensory modes that we can detect, we send out or process through the nervous system. So sensory information is obviously very critical to the function of the nervous system. How do we figure out what it means? How do we put together what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're smelling, tasting? How do we put that all together in some kind of coherent, responsible output or function, right? And that's a process called integration. If I'm seeing, hearing, smelling things that all make sense together, I'll integrate that information together and have an appropriate response figured out. Homeostasis, right? We can't go wrong with homeostasis. Certainly the nervous system is largely responsible for homeostatic maintenance in the body, and it also does this in association with the endocrine system, which we'll be talking a lot more about in chapter 17. The mental activity that you're using to process the information I'm talking about right now, as well as passing the exam for Unit 2, you would not be able to do that mental activity without the nervous system, without the brain and spinal cord and periphery, right? Being able to say, hey, write this answer down, bubble in this little circle, click this button. All of that's the province of the nervous system. And finally, muscles and glands are controlled by the nervous system. We know well how every single skeletal muscle fiber must receive an input from a motor neuron. So the nervous system is composed of two parts. We've already talked about one part a lot. The brain and spinal cord make up what's called the central nervous system, or CNS. Two whole chapters are devoted to them. The chapter 13 to the spinal cord, chapter 14 to the brain. We'll be dealing with those a lot more. But let's get some intro material out of the way on the peripheral nervous system. And the peripheral nervous system, or PNS, has two ways that it conducts information via the central nervous system. One way is that some of the nerves are directly connected into the brain, and those are called cranial nerves. On the other hand, some nerves are directly connected to the spinal cord, and they're called spinal nerves, right? Great terminology here, makes sense. Everything flows well together. A little bit more on those in a minute. We need to cover some terms that we're going to need to understand for this video as well as subsequent videos. Sensory receptors are those detectors of the various kinds of sensory information that we collect. Hearing, sight, seeing, smelling, tasting, all of those are accomplished via these sensory receptors. Now, sensory receptors are going to be broken up. We'll have a whole chapter devoted on those in chapter 16, into those that do the special sensations like seeing, tasting, smelling, and hearing, and then those that are devoted to general sensations that are found in the body wall and skeletal muscle area. Some more terminology. The long process that I already just mentioned, the axon, is often found collected into bundles in the periphery nervous systems and the peripheral nervous system, and those bundles are called nerves. The nerves, just like we saw with skeletal muscle, have a large amount of connective tissue that surround them and protect them and isolate them. So these connective tissue forms what's called a sheath around some nerves, and also at the minimum will provide some type of covering. Now, as we discussed earlier about cranial nerves and spinal nerves, there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves. You'll have to learn all those. We'll talk about them in chapter 14. And then there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves. We'll talk a little bit more about those, but you already know pretty much how to number these nerves and especially how to name them, because you already know the divisions of the vertebral column. So these we'll find are named and numbered according to how they emerge from the spinal cord. A ganglion, so a neuron, remember, is made up of small cell processes called dendrites that are extending from the cell body, and the axon, that is a long extension of the cell body. But the cell body contains the nucleus and all the major organelles of the neuron. And cell bodies will often be found in the periphery in clumps, in gatherings called ganglia. Okay. And so these are found outside the central nervous system. A plexus is a superhighway of nerves that crisscross, and perhaps you've heard of the solar plexus. There's a more formal name associated with it, but we're not going to cover them in too much detail. You'll cover a little bit in lab. And so the solar plexus located just beneath or inferior to the xiphoid process of the sternum. And if you've ever been hit there, it's a real magical experience. More on the peripheral nervous system. It's actually subdivided into two more divisions. One's the sensory components of the peripheral nervous system. So we're looking at all that sensory information that can be conducted to the spinal cord or brain. And if it's conducted to the central nervous system, then it is a sensory nerve, and it is part of the afferent division. Typically, these have cell bodies just outside the spinal cord. Okay. Then there is the motor division, and the motor division is anything that's outputs from the central nervous system to effectors, those things that are going to cause an effect, like lifting my little pinky. I'm causing an effect by my brain commanding my little pinky to elevate. And so it's commanding effectors, these skeletal muscles right in here, to lift the little finger. Now, if we just look at the motor aspect, right, we just covered sensory and motor, afferent and efferent divisions of the peripheral nervous system. If we look just at that motor part, then we can subdivide the motor aspects into two more subdivisions called the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system has to do with voluntary outputs. This is motor, right? So we're talking about outputs, efferent. And so since we're talking motor, we're largely voluntary, we're largely talking the skeletal muscle. And we'll find with this division that the cell bodies are located within the central nervous system. The other division is the autonomic nervous system, and this one has to do with mostly involuntary outputs. And so here we're going to be talking mostly about smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. And in this division, the cell bodies are found in both spinal cord or central nervous system and in the periphery as well. Now we can further subdivide the autonomic nervous system. I know it's getting kind of ridiculous, right? But this isn't going to be testable, but it's something I want to bring up now because your first chapter in A&P 2 will be all about these divisions. And it is the parasympathetic, the parasympathetic division is also known as the rest and digest system, and the sympathetic division called the fight or flight system. There's a third one that is sometimes also included as a separate system. Sometimes it's also incorporated in conjunction with the parasympathetic system, but it's called the enteric nervous system. It has to do with digestion and involves potentially up to 100 million neurons. It's a very sophisticated system, but we won't worry about it till AV2 again. Let's look at the breakdown then, all this beautiful stuff we just covered. So chapters 13 and 14 will be devoted to the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord. It interacts with the peripheral nervous system that has an input division called the sensory division and an output division or efferent division called the motor division. If we look at the sensory, it can be broken up into its autonomic or visceral inputs, those that are coming from the internal part of the body, versus the somatic inputs from the body wall, from sensory receptors that are detecting external information and sending it to the central nervous system, eventually via the peripheral nervous system. Then we have the subdivision of the motor nervous system that has its autonomic division and somatic division. We'll talk a lot about this in this chapter, and we'll deal with the sensory aspects in chapter 16. This one is all devoted to chapter 15, the autonomic division, that can be broken up into the sympathetic and parasympathetic. There you go. That's the introductory breakdown to the nervous system. Let's proceed on to video 2. We'll talk more about the structure of the neuron and more about its function as well. See you then.